Mr. Swanberg, what are you a writer or?
Yes, I am, Mr. Scott. I've written a number of biographies. The last one I did was about William Randolph Hearst. And
Oh yes, I now get a connection.
have you heard of that one?
Yes, I have.
And for the last 6 months or so, I've been working on Dreiser. He strikes me as a very unusual man. Of course, he was a great literary figure, and a most unusual man in his personal life.
Well, he was Theodore Dreiser was unusual in a great many ways. I mean, I admired him for his breakthrough in literature, and I admired him for his ideas. Where did you first learn of my contact with Theodore Dreiser?
Well, of course, I read a couple of letters. I think there are a couple of letters that Dreiser wrote to you in that collection University of Pennsylvania published, a 3-volume collection.
Well, I do not know of it.
Oh, don't you?
No, I've never seen them.
Is that so? Well, there is a 3-volume collection called Letters of Theodore Dreiser, published by the University of Pennsylvania in 1959. And your letters, I think 1 or 2, maybe there's only 1, I'm not sure, but it's a long letter. I remember one very long letter from Dreiser to you.
From Dreiser to me?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Concerning technocracy, and I've read it a long time ago. I don't recall the details, but it's there. I imagine you'd be interested in reading that.
I certainly would, because in the hectic heydays of 32, 33, 34, 5 in there, we had a terrific time. So we didn't have any clipping agencies. We didn't have the office and the organization we now have.
Yes, yes.
We have an organization across the continent, Canada and the United States. But that was totally different. So we missed a whole lot of thousands and thousands of letters from all over.
Yes.
We simply couldn't answer them. Well, Dreiser, I read Dreiser years ago before World War I.
Oh, did you? That early?
Yes. And I'm trying to recall just when I met Dreiser first. It was 1918 or 19. At least that far back.
That early?
Yes.
I see. Yeah.
And let me think. I think shortly. Well, I think it was at that time he lived in a house in all right brick on West 10th Street.
Yes.
In the village.
Right. Right.
And the city of New York, in putting through the extension of 7th Avenue, sheared off the rear one corner of the house.
Of his house?
Yeah, leaving it out in the excavation.
Yeah.
Leaving the sheared off part, facing the excavation of where 7th Avenue came down from Sheridan Square.
Yeah.
Well, that sheared it off.
Is that so?
Yes, just a corner of it. I don't mean to demolish the house or anything, but here was the excavation of the new 7th Avenue being put through, and here was the sliced off back end, the facing on 10th Street, was still there, do you see?
This was about 1918, Mr. Scott?
It was sometime back there. We'll see if we can get a little closer, but Dreiser at that time and Mencken. Well, Mencken was running or at least I should say writing, plus his Baltimore Sun stuff. The Smart Set magazine.
Yes.
And H.L. and Willard Huntington Wright, am I correct?
That's right, yeah.
Willard Huntington Wright, he did before he became famous, He did a analysis of the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh, right, did?
Yes. And he did a book on interpretation of Nietzsche.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Well, then he went, let's see, it was after that he became sick, went to hospital, and he was reading some detective stories. I'm bringing this in relatives, thing I want to bring up. Convalescing, reading these detective stories. And he decided, of course he had excellent training, you understand.
Yes.
He had ability, that he could write far better detective stories. So he made $1 million and over of that series of detective stories, SS Van Dyne.
Right, yes, I remember that.
Well, you identified them together now?
Yeah.
Did you know this before?
Yes, I knew that Wright became Van Dyne, yes.
Yeah.
What a success.
One of the interesting things was that Dreiser, and I forgot now several more people, we were discussing types of people. And I brought out that Wright could do detective stories. He had ability. But he was a psychological similarity. Not that there were other similarities, I don't mean that. Between he and Norman Selby.
Norman Selby. And who was Norman Selby? I don't recall him.
Well, Norman Selby had one of the best physiques in the United States in his heyday. He could hit with either hand. He was marvelous. He could have been heavyweight champion of the world. But no, he would never do anything straight. He'd always figure out all the angles. It took him longer to do that, otherwise known as Kid McCoy.
Kid McCoy?
Norman Selby was Kid McCoy.
Oh, now I begin to tumble, yeah. He was Kid McCoy.
Yeah. Well, Kid McCoy was just that kind of a mentality. He had the physique, he had the talent, he had the ability.
Yeah.
Well, Huntington Wright became mayor of Red Bank, New Jersey by acclamation, if you remember.
He did?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, that's where he was born.
Oh, was he a Red Bank man?
Yes.
Oh, I thought he came from the West. I knew that he was out west for a while.
He either was born there or went to school there. I've forgotten what.
I see.
But that was his hometown. And Theo, I've always called him Theo.
You called Dreiser Theo?
Yeah, to his face.
No.
Yeah. I've had dinner and I've had lunch and I've had breakfast with him and other people, sometimes alone, sometimes. And Theo would get interested, and he'd take a pocket handkerchief and he'd start folding it into little squares. See?
This he always did, didn't he?
And when he got it all into one square, all compressed, then he'd take it out and turn around and start over again in the opposite way. See? And you see, I was you have to bear in mind that I was a kind of a...
Trolls have arrived.
Huh?
The trolls have arrived.
Yeah, okay.
Am I interrupting something, Mr. Scott?
No, they're, what do you call them, just came in from Wisconsin. And, my position, I was a very much younger person and not in his litter. I had a whole raft of ideas, scientific, technological, and social, which I was bringing up. Well, Theo was interested.
Were you teaching at Columbia then, Mr.
No,
Scott?
I never taught at Columbia.
Oh, didn't you?
No.
I thought you did.
No, I had a research project up there, but it had nothing to do with Columbia University, but let's get into that. No, I was independent. As I say, kind of a scientist third class and an engineer with some ideas which at that time were way out in the blue, you see, which are not so out in the blue. Well, Theo had, of course, quite a social consciousness.
Oh, yes.
And on a number of occasions why they would get into discussions. Well, Mink would drink beer, and he'd get a few beers, and of course he was had the idea that he was an iconoclastic demolisher of the bourgeoisie and all the rest, and therefore should lead the discussion. Well, of course, he'd get sleepy after so much beer and go and lie down and wake up in 2 hours and want to continue the discussion where he left it off.
Yeah.
Well,
Mencken would do that?
yeah,
Yeah.
forgetting he'd been to sleep. Well,
Where did these discussions take place, Mr. Scott?
different places. I mean,
Restaurants and so on?
restaurants and some people's houses, apartments, and so on. I mean, there were no fixed place or anything. I mean, I've been Dreiser's guest in California and up, what the devil is the name of the place he had up?
Iroquois at
Up
Mount Kisco?
Mount Kisco.
Yes, yes.
Well, I've been guest there for holidays and weekends and a week at a time.
Yes.
He was had a box when I spoke in the Hollywood Bowl. He had a box there.
Is that so?
Yes, and he gave a cocktail party for a number of people at his house in California. After, and another time he.
This was when he was living in California?
Yes.
Later in his life?
Yes.
Yes,
And he had a suite of rooms up at that apartment hotel is at 72nd and Broadway.
Ansonia?
Ansonia.
Yeah.
In there, and then he gave me a dinner in the Brown Derby in Hollywood.
He did?
Yeah. Had others there that he invited.
That was, when would you say, about 1940, 1941 or so?
Yes, in about that time. I mean, see, I've known him over all these years. Well,
Yeah.
after 25, I didn't see very much of him till the early 30s. So I saw quite a bit of him back in 19, 20, 21, 2, and then through there. And then I was busy and he was someplace else, so it was only an occasional contact.
Did you mention, Mr. Scott, how you happened to meet him in the first place, just how this came about?
No, I'm trying to think.
Well, maybe that'll come later.
It was at some person's house.
Some gathering.
Yeah, some person's house. He became interested, and, well, at that time I didn't know he had that much interest. Well, I was kind of a lone outsider, if you understand.
In the early days?
Yes. And,
you were a very young man then.
oh, yes. And I remember some years later there was quite a intellectual battle about, well, they couldn't understand what I was talking about.
Technocracy?
No, I mean, I was talking about ideas.
I see.
But this was before the publicity on technocracy.
Yes, yeah.
And there were probably 4 or 5, half a dozen there. And Theo said, well, you may not consider it important, but if he's correct, they brought out, well, why doesn't somebody write on this, and so on. Meaning that if it had the significance that I claim for it, that, well, people would just naturally rise up and write about it.
Yeah.
And he said, if Howard is correct, and he said, I have a very grave suspicion that he is. And if that day comes, most people will be writing about it, not just a few. That was Theo's. Well, then they wanted to battle with him about this. Well, they said, but a rearrangement and the scientific planning of all the energy-consuming devices, his term, that's my term, you see.
Yes.
Would become the most significant thing on the social scene. And you and I and anybody else, if we live that long, will be writing about it.
Yeah.
He said, don't fool yourself. Well, that was back in the early 20s, you see. So, I met a number of people. Occasionally we discuss something in literature, but more things on social ideas and here and abroad. I say I had an admiration for his ability and for his insight. See, I had read Sister Carrie and Jenny Gerhardt and The Genius and the Trilogy and all those before I'd ever met him.
I see.
Yeah. And to me, he was a writer that had scored a breakthrough in American literature.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Was never recognized, really recognized here, as he should have been. And I brought out the comparison once that, that he had done a workmanlike job. But the W.L. George, the British author,
yes,
who wrote The Bed of Roses,
yeah,
well, of course, he has the woman in it, you know. But after all, a Britisher could never have a woman do a British Sister Carrie unless she came from the upper classes. So I said, no wonder he named it A Bed of Roses. Dreiser never did that. He took the characters here. He didn't give them the fleur-de-lis of social classification.
Not at all. They came right out of the lower classes.
That's right. Yeah? And of course, Dreiser, if I remember right, his people were Rhineland Catholic German who came over here. And, I forgot now where they settled first, but anyway, Indiana.
Right, yeah.
And then his brother, was it Paul?
That's right, Paul Dresser.
Yeah. Well, of course, he became famous for his singing and his music, and the family changed their name to Dresser.
Did the family change their name?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Well, Theo said something about it. And, well, I said, oh, phooey with that. See? They'll all be changing it back. See? Sure enough. That's the last I heard. That's what they were doing.
But the other members of the family, other than Theodore, actually changed over to Dresser, is that right?
Several of them did.
They did.
Now, whether all of them did, I've forgotten now. It's so long ago.
It was a big family, you know. There were 10 living children along the way there.
Well, I've forgotten how many brothers and how many sisters there were.
5 and 5.
Something like that, and
Yeah.
I've forgotten where Theo was in there.
He was the second to youngest.
Yeah, I knew
Yes.
I knew he wasn't the oldest or the middle.
Second to youngest.
Next to the bottom.
That's right.
Yeah. And then he got I remember, so certain jobs and then newspaper, and then he came to New York, and I've forgotten whether it was Street and Smith. He got
Yeah.
to be something, and then whether that was first or next, and then he got to be editor of the Buttrick publication.
Yeah.
Was that Buttrick?
Yes, he was top editor at Butterick's
Yeah.
for several years.
Yeah, around,
Big job.
Around $25,000 a year.
Yes.
And I think it was after he left then, and on the Sister Carrie Jenny Gerhardt period when he was in difficulty. He was telling me about, well, he had this loaf of rye bread and something else was all he had. And he had it in a bag, and he was going up to, I've forgotten his name, office. Well, he didn't want to go in with his bag of food, and he put it in the windowsill in the hallway, and when he came out, somebody had taken his food.
Yeah, at the railroad where he was
Yeah.
applying for a job. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I've forgotten the details, but
He told you about that,
Yeah.
did he? Mhm.
we had a laugh over that.
Did he tell you something about his nervous breakdown at that time?
Oh, something, but I remember over at his place, he got hit by a taxi cab, knocked down, and Mank was there and a couple of others, but I strapped his ribs up, see? And they were kidding me about, well, tie him up so he can't do anything, you know, but apparently the job was done so good that the doctors wouldn't touch the bandages. So he always used to joke that I did a better job of it than the medical profession and so on. And he was lying down, you know, the way, and I put the bandages around him. They were all advising me how to do it. He told them to shut up or something. You're not writing for the Baltimore Sun, or you're not writing for this or something else. I mean, jokingly.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if this is the type of thing that you're looking for.
Yes, indeed. I'd like to have you go right on, if you don't mind. Your reminiscences here are very interesting.
Well, there are a whole lot of things. I can't think of them in chronological order. And I can't quite remember what the significant incident was that occurred. I mean, what was, sometimes I remember having brunch breakfast. I called it brunch. It was a combination of lunch and breakfast. Be 2.5 hours. Well, it was, I mean, that was at his instigation. Just what for? Certain curiosity on his part. I don't think he had any idea of doing any book on the subject. The Provincetown Theater got underway. And they did one or two of his short plays.
Yes.
And some people I knew were mixed up in it. See, I took the first floor of 107 Waverly Place. That's just off Washington Square.
Mm-hmm.
In the August 1918.
This was when Dreiser was on 12th Street.
Was it 12th or 10th? I forgot.
Yeah, I forget now, too.
Except that I know the rear end was looking over in the sheared off and looking into the excavation.
Yeah.
10th or 12th, one or the other. West of Greenwich, right on the edge of 7th Avenue.
Yeah. I think that was 12th. I think you're right.
12th. That's
He later, some years later, was on 10th.
No, that's the one I mean that was sheared off, the 12th Street one.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's below Sheridan's, below that movie house.
Yeah.
That's where 7th Avenue ended. Then at Greenwich, you remember?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, then it must have been 12th. Yeah?
I think so, yeah.
And then he moved to 10th, something like that. Well, I ate around in Washington Square from the Brevoort to other places and uptown. And I still was connected with the air nitrates, Muscle Shoals, when I first went down there.
Oh, were you?
Yeah. And I had some engineers working over there at 107 Waverly. And that's remade now into a very swank apartment.
Yes. What a change there.
Yeah, 107 Waverly Place. It's next door to the Albert, is it Albert Hotel?
Albert Hotel.
On the corner of McDougal.
Mm-hmm. The Albert's gone now, too, I believe, isn't it?
Well, I haven't been there
I think the Albert is gone.
down there for some time.
I haven't either, but I'm quite sure it's gone.
Well, I knew Charles W. Wood. What was another one? Who was it wrote Spoon River?
Wrote what?
Spoon River?
No, you mean Edgar Lee Masters.
Edgar Lee Masters.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not coupling him up with Charles W. Wood.
Oh, no. No, I see, yeah.
Yeah. Edgar Lee Masters, he was down there then. And
He lived in the village, didn't he?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Charles W. Wood was top man on the old New York World.
Yeah, that one, yeah.
Well, there's interviews with me upstairs in the New York World 1920, up there in my scrapbook.
I see.
And I'm just giving you this to give a background that, while you never could say that I was in the same literary circles with Theodore Dreiser, I was a marginal out here.
Yes.
That that he had an interest in these things then, back right at the end of the war, World War I,
Mm-hmm.
and that he later became more interested when Technocracy broke.
Did you know Masters at all? I mean, was he a sort of a member of this group?
Well, there were a number of them played around. George G. Nathan,
Mm-hmm.
he was, as I remember him, he was French-Jewish originally, background. And of course, Mink was German.
Yes.
And another bunch was Gene O'Neill, and that crowd. Gilpin, the Negro actor that played Emperor Jones, as Gene O'Neill never wrote it, was what gave Gene O'Neill that brought him into prominence.
Yes.
And Paul Robeson, several years later, played Emperor Jones as Gene O'Neill wrote it and was lousy. And if he had played it first, Gene O'Neill probably never would have gained any prominence as a dramatist. Just one of those funny breaks.
How odd these things can happen.
And the Provincetown Theater crowd, there was Jig Cook, and I'm trying to remember some of the writers.
George Cram Cook was very active there, wasn't he?
Huh?
George Cram Cook?
Yes, he had been professor out at the University of Iowa, in literature and drama or something, and had a nervous breakdown. Good heavy pair of shoulders and a big head of white hair. And as I say, I had this place and I ran into all kinds of people. Well, it was interesting. Dreiser was one of the older men, and well, he had achieved something. He stood for something in my book. I thought of him as and I considered him so, as the outstanding novelist of his time, American, who had scored a breakthrough in American literature equivalent to a couple of figures in Europe had scored in their time, but it was new and modern.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Norris had done something with McTeague, was it, that he wrote? And The Pit?
Yeah.
If I remember. I don't know how good my memory is on these things.
Right on the ball.
Mm. And of course, Upton Sinclair had done The Jungle before World War I, and he wrote that Jungle over in a little place outside of Princeton over here. But I never knew Upton Sinclair at that time. Later, yes, he came to see me. But, McKenna. I'm trying to think of some of the other writers.
Was Floyd Dell there at the time?
Floyd Dell, yes, he was. Floyd Dell, Jack Reed, Max Eastman.
Max Eastman, yeah.
Max Eastman and his sisters were on The Masses.
Yes.
And I can't think of her first name now, his sister. And, what was that cartoonist?
Art Young?
Yeah, Art Young.
Yeah.
And
he was a character, wasn't he?
yeah, and then there was a Boardman Robinson.
Yes, another cartoonist.
Yeah. And there's some more if I get going. Well, Jack Reed came into my place at 107 Waverly Place. This is after he came back from Russia. And was living over in Patchen Place, that little...
Yeah.
And he looked at this material of this engineer's working, that drafting table up against the wall. There's one of the old Coifel and Esser drafting table. That was one of the four that was in 107 Waverly Place.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Back in the teens or early 20s, huh?
That was in 1918.
Yeah.
So, and you see, if we'd had, say, back in the early 20s, if we'd had 50 to 100,000 a year over and above our living, to where we could have clamped in these patent applications, even if they hadn't contained any scientific or technological breakthrough, they would have been worth millions for their legal anticipatory blackmail value, as it were, on the economic order.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we covered such a big field. So you can see from this 1920 that there's been an interest in the country of certain types of minds and certain types of interests. Now, not that we went out to preach on the street corner. No, Browder and somebody else, the Communist Party, wrote a pamphlet attacking technocracy, that we went out to try and teach workers in an industrial plant technocracy. Well, that's utter nonsense, you see. And the Communist Sunday Worker attacked us in a big issue of several pages, 2 issues, photographs and everything else. Well, and the amusing part of that is that the Catholic hierarchy picks that up and publishes it word for word, comma for comma, in 47 diocesan papers simultaneously, without ever mentioning that it was taken in toto from the Communist Sunday Worker.
The Catholics copying the communists, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
They were siding with the communists because trying to make out that we were this awful thing. Yeah?
Well, why? What were the communists beefing about? Did they fear that technocracy was something which might eventually put people out of work? It would make everything so efficient that...
Well, you see, we didn't acknowledge that we had anything to learn from Marx or any political economist.
Yes, yes.
We were ironic, sarcastic. We said a liberal is a intellectual individual that spends most of his time making up his mind to decide, not to decide. Yeah. That's one of our... Yeah. And a philosophic approach is very nice as a mental exercise, in an escape from reality. Of course, the ultimate is dementia precox. And that the next 15 minutes of technological acceleration invalidates all the philosophic propositions of all history. Well, now this you see, is too much of a change for them.
The communists wouldn't go for that. I can understand that.
Neither will your liberal or your intellectual.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, intellectuals too, I suppose. Many of them would frown on this attitude.
Yeah. We say, all right, tell us what the problem is. Well, now the Planned Parenthood, Birth Control League, and all that. Well, I knew Margaret Sanger.
Did you?
Yeah, way back. There was an old English tea room, 40th Street or someplace there it was. And there was a gravestone company next to it then. There weren't many buildings in there. And you got crumpets and muffins and a nice little thing. I remember Bill Williams and a whole bunch more and Margaret Sanger. And I said, well, to you it's a cause célèbre. But it isn't birth control that you're preaching. It's voluntary parenthood.
Yeah. There's a distinction there, you're right.
Yeah. And I said, you may have been driven into this because you had 8 children. I think it was 8, I've forgotten. Some number of children she had. But I said, as a collective measure, you have to have a collective means of doing it. Well, of course, we have advocated the hell with all this voluntary parenthood. That is not going to stop reproduction. And we have stated this in the public platform time and time again, that the female of the human species has had the power and the facility to dissolve the fetus without any deleterious results to her reproductive or her general metabolism. That's been known for generations. We didn't know what triggered it, but several biochemists have found out.
They have found out.
Oh, yes. It's tasteless, colorless, odorless. It's cheap to manufacture and put in the drinking water of a metropolitan water system. This warfarin's rat poison,
Yes?
well, it's about the same percentage of effective as the poison is in warfarins, which is around 0.304 of 1%. And no mammal will conceive while that percentage is in the water.
Is that so?
No. Dogs, cats, cows, anything that's a human being.
No deleterious results whatever.
No. And you stop it for 6-7 weeks, bang.
Fertile again.
Now, if you haven't got a metropolitan water supply, you can put it in candy, or soft drinks.
Use an eyedropper.
Well, yeah, but you could, but it's much simpler to put it in something like that. And,
Yeah.
just the same as the Sabin-like live vaccine. Here we wouldn't touch the Sabin vaccine. We wouldn't even run tests on it. Look at what the Russians did. They proved up on 1, 2, and 3 Sabin vaccines. And they ran 79 million one year. They put it in candies.
They beat us on that, huh?
Hmm?
They were ahead of us on that?
Oh, yes, they did it by the million.
Howdy, Gene.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Right. Walter Paul, I'd like you to meet William Swanberg of Connecticut. Walter Paul is from Connecticut.
Glad to
Yeah.
know you, Mr. Paul. Are you the man from Wisconsin?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm from neighboring state of Minnesota.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I'm cracked with him. What part of Wisconsin?
Oh, the central part of Wausau.
Oh, yes, the home of the big insurance company there?
Yeah, the Floridians.
He hasn't anything to do with insurance, though.
No, not at all.
Sit down, Walter. Yeah? And I had contacts with the Johannesburg Oxalism and iron ore. You know, we know something about every iron ore deposit all around the globe, or petroleum, or zinc, or copper, or anything. It doesn't make any difference where it is. And all electric furnaces and one thing and another. You had contact with a lot of technical Swedes, you see.
Yes, I suppose.
And the Berkeley anide process on nitrogen fixation, that was ARC. And, there's another one. Rennerfeld electric furnace, that's Swedish. And we were working on a high frequency. If you pass air under pressure, through electric arc, the heat will create nitrous oxide. But that'll take a whole battery of big towers to convert your nitrous oxide into, by very dilute solution of nitric acid, and it'll absorb the nitrous oxide and become concentrated as it goes down through the tower. But if you put it through a double tube with a corona discharge, high frequency, the slight excess of ozone, it comes out nitrous pentoxide. That's O5. Well, pentoxide O5, all you have to do is put the tube in in a dishpan full of water, and you got nitric acid to the bottom as soon as it hits the water. Well, we didn't have the high-frequency equipment that you have today, do you see? That was crude back then. Today you could knock it right off the spot. Well, Swedes and Germans and everybody else from hell to breakfast were all interested. Everybody except Americans. I regret to say. Just as when Dr. Gustav Gerlings, the great Dutch, he was Director General of the Nederlandisch or something or other, the big sugar thing out in Java, and the big research laboratories. We had produced colloidal sucrose, about 5,800 fineness. You had it in the big jars, you see, with a double ground glass top and rubber on top of that to keep the moisture out because it's hydroscopic, extreme. And this is in the boardroom of a Wall Street banking firm with all the, they wanted to know what colloidal sucrose was. And the great Gustav Gerlings with his magnificent beard, you know, like that, and his had a silver chain and pulled his glasses out like that. He looked at them, he asked them 3 questions. Nobody could answer it. He said, in that case, if you do not know the answer to those 3 questions, any explanation that would be given to you on the nature and structure of colloidal sucrose would be irrelevant, incompetent, and immaterial. He said, you simply do not know. And information of this character to you would fall on barren ground. I'm sorry, gentlemen. A little bit later when he said, I think it's time for us to go to lunch, and he asked for a sheet of notepaper. And he turned to me and he said, may I? Took some out, poured it in the sheet of notepaper and rolled it up like that, and then just went in a cloud. He said, when we come back, he said, everything in this room will be sticky. And then, he said, you will have an appreciation of the hydroscopic absorption nature of something that is 5,800 fineness. Will absorb so many times its own weight in moisture. And everything in that boardroom was sticky. Panel walls and everything. Well, you see, Dreiser, I wish I'd known him earlier.
Yeah, he was there. Let's see. Well, he was in New York from about 1895 on.
That's right.
Of course, he was way ahead of your time.
That's right. He was a...
Because you must have been a very young man in 1918 when you met him.
That's right.
And he, at that time, well, Dreiser was born in 1871, so you can figure that out. He was nearing 40.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was considerably older than I was. And
he knew Margaret Sanger, incidentally, and
oh, yeah.
was strongly in favor of birth control.
Well, but you understand our position on
Yes,
this.
yours is different, yes.
Now, there's no sense talking today. Venezuela's got a birth rate of 47.4. It's 3 times that of Japan. The big explosion population is in South America. Are you going to educate human beings to go in for voluntary parenthood? You haven't got time.
There isn't time?
No.
So what is the answer to that?
William, might I ask you how many automotive vehicles are licensed and on the roads in this country? Approximately. Do you know the order of magnitude?
No. No, I wouldn't know.
Well, there's around 56 million passenger cars.
Are there?
Yeah, there's darn near 73 million cars, buses, and trucks. Yeah.
Wow.
They install prime movers, horsepower prime movers in the United States. Exceeds 11 billion horsepower.
11 billion.
Not million, billion.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of horses.
Yes, and only 5.89% of that 11 billion is in all manufacturing, mining, central stations.
Is that so?
Yes, and that is almost doubled in the last 25 years. The big amount is out here in automotive vehicles.
Almost 95% is in automotive vehicles.
Yeah, 90,
Staggering.
92, 93%, say. 93% anyway.
Yeah, you might almost say this is wasted horsepower or pleasure horsepower. Or...
Yeah, but if you double the percentage in prime movers in industry, you'll have an addition of around 16 million to the present employment. You aren't going to operate. Now, it's the same attitude as we have towards peace. I know many of these Quakers and others that are insane, and for instance, there's a pamphlet done on nuclear devices by SANE that's pretty excellent, technical. But therefore, complete disarmament, the complete destruction of all nuclear devices, all bombers, planes, missiles, bases, everything else. And they want peace. Well, they say, are you in favor of peace? We said yes. Oh, well, then they're all interested. We say we like your program, but we are for it on an entirely different basis than we think you're for it. What do you mean? If you're for disarmament, complete disarmament against nuclear warfare, well then you should be with it. Well, that's very interesting. Do you realize the consequences that if you got this peace that you're advocating, it'd mean the total elimination from the budget of the United States of your war material and all dependent material? Yeah. We'll take the United States now and leave the rest of it out. And it would be an addition of somewhere between 14 and 16 million to your existing unemployed. That's why we're for your program. Are you prepared to face the consequences? Oh, no. Oh, you want this system, and you want peace, and have this system the way it is? Well, you're crazier than hell. No, we're hard-boiled realists. We'll back it up with facts and figures. Mm-hmm. And we know what we're talking about. And nobody ever gives us a battle, do they? Any place. Universities, any Canada, United States, no.
Do you feel then that there is no possible way of gradually dismantling the war machine?
Well, what?
Without ruining the economy?
When you get into a process of gradualism, sir, will the process of gradualism equal an acceleration, the technological acceleration, which is also accelerating? May I ask you that?
Well, you're way over my head now.
Now, wait a minute. This technological process, any philosophic, moral, or subjective statement that is made today by anyone
Yeah.
is invalidated and rendered obsolescent and stupid by the next 15 minutes of technological acceleration. Completely out in the void.
Yes. So that technologically, there is no question but what the thing has to go on exactly as it is going on now, or primarily as it is.
No,
No?
no. But the people who are advocating peace are not prepared. They want the same status quo as you have now, economic status quo.
Yeah.
Well, but you won't have it.
No, you certainly
And you
wouldn't.
won't have it if you go on producing the war equipment either.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
But if you were to suddenly abolish all the missiles, nuclear devices, planes, bases and everything around the world and destroy all the conventional arms, this country couldn't run. This country is a warfare state
Yes,
with
indeed.
certain welfare emoluments dispensed and very much filtered. Yeah? In fact, almost completely filtered out before it reaches the lower 50, 60 million.
And you feel technologically this is a condition which is bound to be maintained, or if it is not maintained, it would mean economic ruin.
You mean the war thing?
The war production, the war economy that we have.
Well, what are they going to substitute? See, we're losing jobs at the rate of about 35,000 a week from technological advancement.
Yeah, 35,000 a week.
Every damn week in the year.
Mm.
Huh? Besides that, you got your youth coming out of high school. You have 1,300,000 who graduated last year that the Department of Labor, Goldberg, and President Kennedy admit and publicly proclaim have never been employed.
Yeah.
They are not on the unemployed list now, understand. They've never had a job, so
They just
therefore,
never had a job, yeah.
yeah, therefore they're not employed.
Yes.
But they've never had a job. You've got 1,700,000 to 1,800,000. There's only a few days left in June, and they'll be here. Now, we've been talking about technological processes, and we've devised a lot of ourselves, and we've gotten a lot of help from almost anybody that ever designed any piece of equipment or process, whether they agreed with us or not. If they did much of it, they came to the same conclusions as we did, because their very nature of the work forced them to the same conclusion. So,
Well, now, would you clear up for me your introduction of technocracy, as I recall, was in about, when was it, 1930, 1931, 32?
no, you see, I started this, took this floor more at 107 Waverly Place. And I set up, I had all these engineers and chemists and so on that have been in the war industries during the war. Well, the war was over, down, so I said, well, you can park here. They even put in three-tier bunks in there. There was a lot of space, you see. Big, long building. And we formed a technical alliance. And here's one published in 1920.
The Technical Alliance, huh?
Yeah. And there's the names of the original committee.
Oh, Carson and Dibland was one of them.
Yeah. Now, if you want to know who the other names are, just read them off and I'll tell you.
Stuart Chase was one of them.
Yes.
I've met him.
Well, now, Stuart Chase was an accountant in the Federal Trade Commission in Washington. And I got him out of that into the office of the TA. He wasn't at 107 Waverly Place, but when we moved to 23 West 35th Street, he was in that office.
And you had a fellow named Steinmetz with you.
Wow. What a group you had. And this, I take it, was the beginning of Technocracy.
Yes, well, we called it Technocracy then as an idea, yes.
Yeah.
In contradistinction to autocracy, the rule of one, and plutocracy, the rule of wealth, and democracy, supposedly the rule of the many, technocracy would be the rule of science.
Yeah.
Well, besides this, I had almost every scientist in the Bureau of Standards signed up, except the political director. That we never tried. No. Ackerman, he was the architect for Cornell University. Dr. Alsberg, he was chief chemist of the Department of Agriculture. That's on here. I'm just reading off the name. Alan Carpenter was a doctor. He and his brother were quite famous at the time. L.K. Comstock, that's a great firm of electrical contractors. It's still the biggest firm of electrical contractors in New York. Stuart Chase, you know, Alice Barris Fernandez. Well, she was deputy chief of the U.S. Department of Education in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
And Bassett Jones was a member of the firm of Meyer, Strong, and Jones, consulting engineers, 101 Park Avenue. He died just last year, a year ago. And his brother was Sullivan Jones, who became state architect of the state of New York. And his father was the architect who built the brick church on Fifth Avenue. And he was the firm, they were consulting to the Otis Elevator and the General Electric. And the chief of the Otis, chief engineer of the Otis Electric was on this. And Robert Cohn was president of the American Institute of Architects. Benton Mackay, got him out of the Department of Forestry. And his brother was Percy Mackay, the dramatist and the poet.
Oh, yes.
You'll see where this came in. And then later, Benton formulated and advocated and set up the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, did he?
Yes, he's the father of the Appalachian Trails. This is after this.
Yes,
See?
yes.
Leyland Olds became secretary. He graduated from Amherst, if I remember. And he became secretary of the New York State Power Authority, which never amounted to anything until just now. And then Roosevelt moved him to Washington to become federal power administrator in the New Deal. Steinmetz, you know, General Electric. Richard C. Tolman was Dean of Physics at Caltech.
He's a well-known name, yes.
Well, he's the one that Oppenheimer and all these young physicists studied under and had the bull sessions out there at Dick's house. Well, Dick was, with Vanderbilt Bush, was in charge of the Scientific Security National Council. They were head of it, and then Dick was atomic representative on the Combined Chiefs of Staff of Great Britain and the United States. John Carl Vaughan was head of the Vanderbilt Clinic and another hospital. Was one of the top surgeons. He was a brother-in-law of Jesse Lynch Williams, the dramatist.
Yes.
They married sisters, I think.
I see.
And Jesse Lynch Williams was a member of this back then.
Oh, was he?
Oh, yes.
Ah.
John Carl Vaughan, one of his daughters, lived out here. She's married a second time to a professor of architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, just over here about 12 miles. Thorsten Veblen, you know, Whittaker, Charles H. Whittaker, was editor-in-chief of the American Institute of Architects Journal their publication. That gives you some idea of what it was.
You had quite a group there.
Yes, there were others, and not that Theo was in on all of this. He knew that something was going on. He knew something of it.
Yes.
Well, and
Well, he became greatly interested in it in the early 30s, though, did he not?
Well, he never was a member.
No.
He didn't join.
But I mean, he was interested as an outsider, as a man with a social conscience, trying to cure the ills of the country, was he not?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And because he had known me, and as the young upstart, you might put it, had battled with everybody over ideas, and he had, to a large extent, taken, or appeared to take, my side, and I think he was sincere.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was always sincere, was he not?
I have never found him any other way,
Mm-hmm.
to my knowledge. So that, as I say, later after he got the money from Hollywood and so on, well, he tried to be expansive and so on, tried to enjoy it. He didn't have much time. I think he had a sense of that himself and some 3 or 4 odd remarks. And it was only once that, to me, that he made a faux pas, as far as I was concerned. And that was a dinner out in Los Angeles when he had, there were a couple of these communist writers, amongst others, that he invited. I was supposed to be the guest, his guest of honor, and he invited them to have a discussion with me.
Was this the one at the Brown Derby, or was this at home?
No, the one, he had a cocktail party, and then he had another one at his home. Probably the one at the Brown Derby.
This was after he moved out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one was this, he's editor in absentee of this National Guardian. Belfridge. He's an English Jew, isn't he?
Eldridge?
Belfridge.
Oh, Belfridge. Cedric Belfridge.
Cedric Belfridge.
Ah, yes. Was he there?
He was there.
Uh-huh.
Now, there's a couple of others. And Cedric Belfridge was all for Russia and the Marxian system. I said, well, I wasn't interested in that, except as its evolutionary development
Yes.
Of a great country in a great area, and what they would do with it. But I wasn't interested in the academic theory.
Yeah.
And it developed into quite a discussion. Well, wasn't it important to the United States? I says, only in this sense that it gave us an example of what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he took exception to that, and I can't think of...
Who, Dreiser did?
Huh?
Dreiser took exception to that?
No.
Belfridge did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Dreiser, who was more or less the kind of major domo
Yeah.
sitting there and enjoying the...
Was John...
A little closer, but...
Yeah.
Dreiser at that time and Mencken. Well, Mencken was running the, or at least I should say writing, plus his Baltimore Sun stuff, the Smart Set magazine.
Yes.
and H.L. and Willard Huntington Wright, am I correct?
That's right, yeah.
Willard Huntington Wright, he did before he became famous, he did a analysis of the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh, Wright did?
Yes, and he did a book on interpretation of Nietzsche.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Well, then he went, let's see, it was after that he became sick, went to hospital, and he was reading some detective stories. I'm bringing this in relatives, thing I want to bring up. Convalescing, reading these detective stories. And he decided, of course he had excellent training, you understand.
Yes.
He had ability, that he could write far better detective stories. So he made $1 million and over of that series of detective stories, S.S. Van Dyne.
Right, yes, I remember that.
Well, you identified them together now?
Yeah.
Did you know this before?
Yes, I knew that Wright became Van Dyne, yes.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
what a success.
One of the interesting things was that
Yes, yes.
we have an organization across the continent, Canada and the United States. But that was totally different. So we missed a whole lot of thousands and thousands of letters from all over.
Yes.
Well, we simply couldn't answer them. Well, Dreiser, I read Dreiser years ago before World War I.
Oh, did you? That early?
Yes. And I'm trying to recall just when I met Dreiser first. It was 1918 or 19. At least that far back.
That early?
Yes.
I see, yeah.
And let me think. Gosh. I think shortly, well, I think it was at that time he lived in a house in all red brick on West 10th Street
Yes.
in the village.
Right, right.
And the city of New York, in putting through the extension of 7th Avenue, sheared off the rear one corner of the house.
Of his house?
Yeah, leaving it out in the excavation.
Yeah.
Leaving the sheared off part facing the excavation of the, you know, where 7th Avenue came down from
Yes.
Sheridan Square.
Yeah.
Well, that sheared it off.
Is that so?
Yes, just a corner of it. I don't mean to demolish the house or anything,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
here was the excavation of the new 7th Avenue being put through, and here was the sliced off back end.
Mm-hmm.
The facing on 10th Street
Yeah.
was still there, do you see?
This was about 1918, Mr. Scott?
It was sometime back there. We'll see if we can get a little hometown. And Theo, I mean, I've always called him Theo.
You called Dreiser Theo?
Yeah, to his
Uh-huh.
face, you know. Yeah. I've had dinner and I've had lunch and I've had breakfast with him and other people. Sometimes alone, sometimes. And Theo would get interested, you know, and he'd take a pocket handkerchief and he'd start folding it into little squares. See?
This he always did, didn't he?
And when he got it all into one square, all compressed, then he'd take it out and turn around and start over again in the opposite way. See? And you see, I was you have to bear in mind that I was a kind of a,
Trolls have arrived.
huh?
The trolls have arrived.
Yeah, okay.
Am I interrupting something,
No,
Mr. Scott?
no, there, what do you call 'em, just came in from Wisconsin. And, I mean, my position, I was a very much younger person and not in his litter. I had a whole raft of ideas, scientific, technological, and social, which I was bringing up. Well, Theo was interested in those.
Were you teaching at Columbia then, Mr.
No,
Scott?
I never taught at Columbia.
Oh, didn't you?
No,
I thought you did.
no. No, I had a research project up there, but it had nothing to do with Columbia University, but let's get into that. No, I was independent. As I say, kind of a scientist third class and an engineer with a Dreiser, and I forgot now, several more people. We were discussing types of people. And I brought out that Wright could do detective stories. He had ability. But he was a psychological similarity. Not that there were other similarities, I don't mean that. Between he and Norman Selby.
Norman Selby. And who was Norman Selby? I don't recall him.
Well, Norman Selby had one of the best physiques in the United States in his heyday. He could hit with either hand. He was marvelous. He could have been heavyweight champion of the world. But no, he would never do anything straight. He'd always figure out how all the angles. It took him longer to do that, otherwise known as Kid McCoy.
Kid McCoy?
Norman Selby was Kid McCoy.
Oh, now I begin to tumble, yeah. He was Kid McCoy.
Yeah. Well, Kid McCoy was just that kind of a mentality. He had the physique, he had the talent, he had the ability.
Yeah.
Well, Huntington Wright became mayor of Red Bank, New Jersey by acclamation, if you remember.
He did?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, that's where he was born.
Oh, was he a Red Bank man?
Yes.
Oh, I thought he came from the West. I knew that he was out West for a
He
while.
either was born there or went to school there. I've forgotten what.
I see.
But that was his. Mr. Swanberg, what, are you a writer or?
Yes, I am, Mr. Scott. I've written a number of biographies. The last one I did was about William Randolph Hearst. And
Oh, yes, I now get the connection.
have you heard of that one?
Yes, I have.
And, for the last 6 months or so, I've been working on Dreiser. He strikes me as a very unusual man. Of course, he was a great literary figure. And a most unusual man in his personal life.
Well, he was, Theodore Dreiser was unusual in a great many ways. I mean, I admired him for his breakthrough in literature, and I admired him for his ideas. Where did you first learn of my contact with Theodore Dreiser?
Well, of course, I read a couple of letters. I think there are a couple of letters that Dreiser wrote to you in that collection University of Pennsylvania published, a 3-volume collection.
Well, I do not know of it.
Oh, don't you?
No, I've never seen them.
Is that so? Well, there is a 3-volume collection called Letters of Theodore Dreiser, published by the University of Pennsylvania in 1959. And your letters, I think 1 or 2, maybe there's only 1, I'm not sure, but it's a long letter. I remember one very long letter from Dreiser to you.
From Dreiser to me?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Concerning technocracy, and I read it a long time ago. I don't recall the details, but it's there. I imagine you'd be interested in reading that.
I certainly would, because in the hectic heydays of 32, 33, 34, 5 in there, we had a terrific time. So we didn't have any clipping agencies. We didn't have the office and the organization we now